Hello everyone, Becca here with the Wild Bunch, the YouTube design team for wildorchidcrafts.com, and today I have a project to share with you guys, so stay tuned and I hope you enjoy. Today I thought I would do a tutorial and I wanted to show you how to make these tags for Christmas, and all of the products that I'm using from Wild Orchid Crafts I will be listing in the description box, so be sure to check that out. And here's the first one we're gonna be making. So we're gonna start with the tag base. You can actually use a pre-cut tag or you can cut it yourself. I'm positioning some snowflake stamps on the tag and then I'm gonna pick it up with my acrylic block. I'm going to be embossing this, so I'm using my EK Success powder tool just to stop the embossing powder from sticking on any areas of the paper that I do not want it to stick to. And then I'm going to ink up my stamps and just press it on there, and I'm going to stamp again and again until I cover the whole tag. Then I'm going to cover with my embossing powder, and I'm using a paper to catch the excess powder so that I don't waste. I'm going to tip that over back into the pot, and then I'm going to heat emboss my tag until the powder is melted. Next, I'm going to bring in some distress inks. I'm going to be using Tumble Glass and also Stormy Sky. And Tumble Glass is the lighter color, so I used that first and then I came in with the darker color just to frame that a little bit better. Once I was done with the inking, I used a baby wipe just to highlight my stamped image a little bit better. Next, I'm going to take some craft cardstock. I'm going to just tear this into a smaller piece and then I'm going to run it through a paper crimper. Then I'm going to just tear this into a much smaller piece just to fit on the front of my tag. And I've got some white paint here and I'm just using my finger and just going over that corrugated effect paper. I just wanted this to be very distressed looking, so once I'm happy with it, I can go ahead and adhere that to the tag. And I'm also adding some lace across the top of that corrugated paper. Next, I am going to be using a doily, which is from Wild Orchid Crafts. I'm going to then top that with a die cut piece of cardstock, and then I'm going to trim the excess from both sides. And on the center of that die cut, I wanted to add this poinsettia flower. And the first thing I'm going to do is ink it a little bit, and I'm using the same inks as before. And then I'm going to go ahead and glue that in place. And then for the sentiment, I am once again going to heat emboss the message, and this one just happens to be a let us know stamp, and I'm actually using a silver embossing powder for this one. Once I've heat embossed that image, I trimmed the cardstock and then I inked the edges again with the same colors. And when I adhered that onto the tag, you might be able to see that I have actually pulled the center of that image up a little bit, and that's because I just wanted to look like a banner. And then I just teared the ends off and then inked the edges as well with the same ink once again. Next step I'm going to do is to pierce a hole through the top of the tag, and then I'm going to be adding an eyelet, and I'm going to use my big bite to punch the hole and also to set the eyelet in place. And once that's done, I can take some seam binding and thread it through and tie into a knot, and then with a separate piece of the same colored seam binding, I will tie a little bow and adhere that to the top. Now the next thing I want to do here, I wanted to add some pearls, and I didn't have any pearls that matched the color of my tag, so I'm just coloring some white pearls with pro markers, and then I'm going to be using those pearls for the project. I'm just using my craft knife to pick up the pearl and then adding a little bit of glue and just placing those pearls on my tag. And then the last thing I'm going to do for this tag is add some stickles to the flower, and then I'm going to use my finger just to spread that around a little bit. And that is it for this tag. And this is the next tag we're going to be making. So I already prepped my work surface with some cling film or plastic wrap or whatever you call these things, is the stuff that we use in the kitchen. And I'm using Victorian Velvet ink from Tim Holtz, and I'm just pressing that against the plastic just in random spots. Then I'm going to spray with a little bit of water and press down my tag. I actually wanted a little bit more color, so you can see I'm pushing that down a couple more times until I'm happy with it. And once I am, I'm just using my heat tool to finish drying that. And if the paper gets a little bit worked, just straighten that up with your hands and that'll be fine. Next thing I'm going to do is use the same ink to ink up the edges of this tag, and I just wanted to frame that a little bit better, and it just gives a little bit more dimension. So I cut out 2 pieces of lace to go on one corner, and I'm gonna layer them up. So I'm adhering the first layer first, and then I'm going to go ahead and place the second layer on top, and then I'll turn it around and trim off the excess. Next, I'm going to be using this heart-shaped doily, and I'm going to place that on my tag and then trim the excess as well. And I'm going to top that with a piece of die-cut cardstock, and once again I'll trim the edge. And on the center of that die cut, I wanted to add this embellishment from Wild Orchid Crafts. It's a wooden piece and is a reindeer. So what I'm doing is I'm going to cover that with Versamark, and then I'm going to use some gold embossing powder on it. And then I'm going to use my heat tool just to melt that embossing powder. And once that cools, I'm going to repeat this step because I wanted a thicker layer and I wanted it to be really smooth. And by using a second layer, you get a smoother finish. Then I'll set that aside to dry. And I'm once again going to emboss my sentiment, and I'm using the same gold embossing powder. Then I'll trim this and ink the edges. I'll place that where I want on my tag, and then I'll cut and ink the ends as well. Now, the lace I have used has these tiny little flowers, and I wanted to add a little pearl in the center of each of those flowers, so that's what I'm doing next. And I'm going to finish this off by adding some seam binding, and just like before, I added a bow in the center, and this time I'm going to top the bow with this pearl in the diamond circle from Wild Orchid Crafts as well. And that is it for the second tag. The next tag we're going to be making is this one right here with the Christmas tree. So I'm going to be starting off with 2 pieces of card. The first one is the base, and the second one is about 1/2 inch smaller than the base, and I've cut it out from pattern paper, and I'm just distressing the edges with this distress tool, and I'm going to do that all the way around. And once I've done that, I'm going to take my Victorian Velvet ink and just go around the edges with that ink. Then I'm going to place a doily in the center of this tag, and I'm also going to be using some lace going across the center. This time I'm going to adhere the lace to the back of the tag. I'm also going to adhere 2 pieces of seam binding to the back, and then I'll bring them over the front and tie it into a bow. In the center of that doily, I'm going to be using another die cut piece of cardstock, and I'm just going to adhere that in place. And then in the center of that, I'm going to be using this embellishment that I made a little while ago, and I'll have the link on the screen for you guys to check it out if you want to see how I made that. I'm just placing that in the center with some glue, and then I'm going to adhere the whole thing onto the base of my tag, and I'm going to finish this off once again with an eyelet and also seam binding. Then for my sentiment, I've cut out a little rectangular piece of card, and I'm just rounding the corners with this corner chomper, and I'm using the 1/4 inch corner, and I'm going to emboss it once again, and this time I'm using a copper embossing powder, and I'm just going to go ahead and heat emboss this. And what I decided to do was to frame the edges of this sentiment cutout. I'm using this Ink Essential embossing pen, and it's pretty much like Versamark but in a pen form. So I'm just adding that to the edges, and then I'm going to add the embossing powder and then heat emboss it with my heat tool. And I decided to distress this with the distress tool at the very end, and then I just adhere that in place. The last thing I'm gonna do for this tag is use some pearls, and once again I didn't have the matching colors that I wanted, so I went ahead and colored it with pro markers, and that is it for this tag. And here is the next tag we'll be making. I think this one is very fun. So I'm starting off with a very light pale cream color cardstock. And I'm going to use this extra piece of card here just to mask off a portion of this tag. And I'm using ATG adhesive just because I find that it's more forgiving. And I'm actually taking some of the tack off using my fingers. And once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and use a grid mat and just adhere that on a straight line. And I'm going to cover up just a little bit less than half of that tag. Once I've done that, I'm going to bring in some Barn Door Distress ink, and I'm going to ink all over the edges and also across the line of that mask. And once I've done that, I'm going to heat set it just to help it dry a little bit, and then I'll peel off that mask very carefully. And I'll position the mask on the opposite side this time. And for this section, I'm going to be using a black ink, and I'm going to ink all around once again like I did before. And then I'll remove my mask. And this is the result that you get. Now I'm going to take this doily and I'm going to add some adhesive to a small portion of the doily. And then I'll place it on top just like so and trim off the excess. Next, I'm going to be using some black Guipure lace, which is also from Wild Orchid Crafts. I'm going to add some adhesive on that line across the center and then place my lace. And on the center of that, I'm going to be using this silver ribbon buckle from Wild Orchid Crafts as well. I'm going to take a wire cutting plier and cut out the center portion of that buckle. And then I'm going to adhere that in place right in the center of the lace. And that's going to act like the belt of this tag. Now I'm going to be using 3 of these flower-shaped flat back pearls, which is also from Wild Orchid Crafts, and I'm coloring them black with some pro markers. Once I finish coloring them, I'm going to place them on my tag just so I know where I want them to be, and then I'm going to go ahead and adhere them in place. I'll just add a little bit of glue and just place the pearl. I've gone ahead and added my eyelet once again. I'm using a black eyelet this time. And then I'm going to stamp my sentiment on the very bottom. I ended up deciding to stamp this on the bottom at the very last minute. Otherwise, I would have probably done this before I adhered the lace in place. But it worked out just fine, so I was just careful not to add any of the embossing powder onto the lace. I just tipped it over and heat embossed it, and it worked out just fine. And I just finished it off with some seam binding. So that is all the 4 tags. I really hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. They're all very easy to make, and you can change them up to personalize to your taste. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and I will catch you guys next time. Bye!